My name is Damian Gorman. I'm a poet, born in Northern Ireland, now living in Wales. But as a poet, you could say I am at home in language, in the languages I know, namely English, Irish and French. Words give me solace and delight, and they always have done. This is Newcastle, County Down, where I was born and reared. Now, one of the many things I remember about growing up here is a clatter of very particular words that my father brought to the table. Gansh, gleip, slicked, carnapsius, words that I now understand to be from the Ulster-Scots tradition. These words, this Ulster-Scots, was in the air when I was growing up. And while it was in the air, I've never, for all that I have a great taste, savour for language, I've never run it to ground. And that's really what I would like to try and do in this. To find out a bit more about it, to find out why it's so important to some people, talk to some of those people, and to ask why there can be such a shouting match about this, which at the heels of the hunt is a way of speaking.
Ulster-Scots really has become implicated in the culture wars in Northern Ireland.
I honestly have encountered most hostility to Ulster-Scots. I mean, very bluntly, from middle-class prods.
It's what I've been raised with. It's what my grandparents spoke and great-grandparents spoke, and what this village grew out of was this was their native tongue.
I'm beginning in the Ulster-Scots heartland in Newton Ards with the man after my own heart, the writer Hugh Robinson. There you are.
Hello, Damian.
Hugh Robinson, how the hell are you?
How are you?
Hugh was part of a writers' group I started here over 30 years ago.
Good to see you.
Back where we began, as the man said.
Back where we started.
We filled the big room in the town hall to our great surprise. There he is.
Do you remember that? First time you saw it, do you remember?
I do remember that. I do remember that. So the first writers' group.
Yes.
We did this wee pamphlet, as you remember.
I remember it well.
So this was step 2, taking it outside of ourselves. And there we are, the Ards Writers Group, Poems and Stories, 1988.
That's wonderful.
But as if that wasn't scary enough, if you look at the double-page spread in the middle, there's the committee. There's a very young me.
Yes.
And there's a very young you.
That was a wonderful time. That was the kernel. That's where it all started that night. Well, that was our first publication. And we as writers, Damien, were so proud of that. We were so proud of that there, that we were in that there as writers.
I always knew that Hugh would have a book of his own one day.
I was brought up in a place called Ballyhay, just outside Donaghadee. Brought up there as a wee boy in among the fields and the characters who lived in the countryside. The characters always seemed to be old men, but looking back, I know that even then, this was in the 1950s, the way of life that I was leading then could have been a way of life of almost 100 years ago. I thought, this life that I know, this landscape is almost passing away, but more importantly, the characters are passing away, and the way of life is passing away, and when it's gone, nobody will know anything about it or remember it, which is a real shame. And I would like to somehow put down in words what this way of life was like.
In 1999, Hugh published Across the Fields of Yesterday, a homage to the Ulster-Scots people and tongue of his young day. What I'd like to do, if this is all right with you, is to take a couple of paragraphs from a story called The Haystacks in the original Across the Fields of Yesterday, And if you wouldn't mind reading that.
Every day after school, I clothed my school bag along with the cracks of buttermilk and run into the field for to see the first signs of new life. Ach, but there was never any corn, nothing. Only brown desert, unchanged for the first day was sad the seed. And Robert never come near the field now. It all seemed to be without purpose. The tractor and the plough and the harrow and the sound of the seed. And I turned away, fair gaunt. I had yet to learn that in the husbandry of the land, as in life, there is to everything a season, and a reason to everything under heaven.
There's a power, there's a heft to the word written down. When I read Hugh's books, I feel like I'm eavesdropping on the Ulster-Scots world that he was reared in. Some of the language, some of that world is unfamiliar to me, but a lot of it I recognise, can share, I'm in word range of.
This is Seamus Heaney's Wintering Out, and it's the personal copy that he inscribed to John Hewitt. And as you can see that he says here, to John, who taught me first about traditions, 20th November 1972.
With the S underlined.
Yes, very much so. With effect.
Are there many people for whom Ulster-Scots is the go-to language of their creative imaginations and their writerly effort?
I think it would be a lie to say that this is something that takes the imagination of lots and lots of people. But for some writers, this is the keystone of who they are as a creative person. This is the thing that fires them. It connects them to the everyday world, and it also connects them to the world of imagination and creativity, and it's a very, very powerful force in them.
I think as a writer that one of the things that makes for literature is that you have writers who are prepared to sing and to say out loud what their own wee devil bids them without fetters. And that's the important thing. Now, in the case of Ulster-Scots, do you think there might be some fetters on the language for writers?
I think often a lot of the fetters are self-imposed, that there is an incredible cultural cringe in the mindset of some Ulster-Scots, but it is a case of finding the means to say you have license to do this. This is not bad English. This is actually good Ulster-Scots that you're speaking in.
You said to me that you would consider Derry Girls as an Ulster-Scots comedy. How so?
Well, I think if you go in and you drill down into the language of Derry Girls, you actually get a profoundly Ulster-Scots variety of words, register of words, and idioms that there's such a strong impact of Scots and Ulster-Scots in Derry that it would be, it would have been difficult to write Derry Girls without Ulster-Scots.
Not only as a writer, but as a human being, you need to be at home in language. When I came to actually live in the homeland of Ulster-Scots, it took me time to get my feet under the table, but I think I did. So this is Grey Abbey, or Greba, on the Ards Peninsula, and I lived here for 4 years from 1984. To tell you the truth, at the very start, I was a bit out of my element because some of the people here were so broad in their Scots that I struggled to actually understand them. But the point is that I wanted to. One of the things I was particularly fond of was a place name, a street name round the corner from where our house was, and the street name was Hardbreed Ra. Hard Bread Row. That's where the poor people lived. But the point is, why would you translate that? from the Ulster-Scots into standard English, because when you do that, I think now you translate it out of itself, you translate it out of its own power, and there's no real call to do that.
We have many traditions flowing into what makes us here, as we know. And among these traditions are class division and our own brand of snobbery.
Ulster-Scots was not, as it were, the language of political unionism. And certainly over the period of Stormont, the political emphasis was one which stressed union. The Ulster-Scots, with their fierce sense of independence, were actually going against the stream of identifying with a British culture.
Ivan, as somebody who has studied languages all of your working life, what would you say that a language is actually for? What's the job of a language?
Well, I think language has many functions. It's a means of communication, but it's also a means of the cultural expression of the native speakers. After all, it is theirs. It doesn't belong to academics, it doesn't belong to administrators, it belongs to those who speak and use it as part of their culture.
When I moved into the Ards peninsula, into the place in my native County Down where Ulster-Scots is natively spoken, I picked up two distinct registers to the talk: the broad, easy speech among each other, and the proper, polite and tighter way of talking to outsiders. I asked Carol and Elaine, two friends from the village of Portavogie, to talk me through things.
So, Carol, you were saying because the speech around Portavogie is so broad, you thought it'd give you a real identity with Scotland. So is Scotland for you the motherland, or is that putting it a bit strong?
Yeah, well, we connect very well when we're in Scotland because they talk the same as us. So, you know, we can understand their language and they can understand us. It's what I've been raised with. It's what my grandparents spoke and great-grandparents spoke and what this village grew out of.
It's our heritage. And you can't lose your heritage. I think it's very important that you keep your heritage.
So when you were the postmistress in Portavogie, I mean, I expect you just spoke your own way.
Why?
You didn't have to come out of that at all.
No, unless there was somebody coming in that was a visitor and no one understood a word you'd said.
It wasn't it the civil service you worked in?
Yes.
So you were expected. You couldn't do what Carol did in the post office.
They wouldn't have understood me. Now the folk were mostly fae Bangor, but there were some further afield, and there's no way I would have spoke Ulster-Scots to these folk.
My mother was always drumming it into us. Speak properly at school, speak properly when you're out anywhere, and don't be so broad talking. But I love my native tongue. I just love being along with Elaine, being with Dennis, my husband. We talk like this all the time in the house. You know, with you dying or,
Same.
you know, yeah.
And I would do it at home. My husband's from Newton, and I would say something about, that dog's no wheel, or that dog needs took it. And he says, what's a dog? I mean, we were married 40 years, you know. And I said, you know rightly what a dog is? And he says, we wish you would speak properly. He's keeping me going, like. And I says, it's a recognised minority language, Ulster-Scots. Shut your mouth. But it's only a bit of fun. It's only fun.
Ulster-Scots is rooted in country people, and even here in East Belfast, there wouldn't be many speakers. But what there is, here at the bottom of the Newton Ards Road, is a gathering of a couple of hundred people every week to study Irish. So Linda, we want to begin just with the journey into Irish, which was the beginning in a way of your journey into Ulster-Scots. And at the time, you were the wife of the leader of the PUP. So how did that happen?
Well, I was introduced to it. It was a 6-week taster here in East Belfast Mission. It was part of a cross-community women's group, women from the Newton Ards Road and women from the Short Strand. But there was also something about it, you know, to say that I speak Irish, you don't say Lorem Gaelic, you say to Gaelic Uggam. Yeah. You know, I have Irish. And I think something about that, I thought, I want to have that. I want to be able to say to Gaelic Uggam.
You said to me before that when you embrace one, Irish or Ulster-Scots, you actually embrace the other. What did you mean by that?
Well, the fact that, you know, Scots borrowed in many Gaelic words, which then came over to Ireland. And, you know, here too, where there were Irish speakers, Ulster-Scots borrowed in many Gaelic words as well. And the same thing, Gaelic borrowed in many Scots words. So there is an overlap between the languages.
In a place like ours, I think there is a case, you know, there's a kind of understandable case for sticking with your own. Because, you know, you speak the same way, you can hold each other up in that way, that shared way you have of speaking. But if we move outside that, if as you have done, people move outside that, I think it's helpful to have a case for doing that. What do you think is the case for moving outside the self or the small group towards the other?
Well, I suppose one of the first things I have to say there is I don't feel that I'm embracing the other. And in fact, I resent the idea that I'm embracing the other, because that's saying to me that the language doesn't belong to me, that the language belongs to one community, and it doesn't. You know, the languages don't discriminate on religious grounds. The languages belong to whoever speaks them, and always have done.
The glory of any language, its heroes and heroines, are the writers taught to each generation because they are seen to matter to each generation. Yeats and Heaney and Egonal are taught, James Orr inexplicably is not. And yet this Ballycarry man's Irish cottier's death and burial, written in Ulster-Scots more than 200 years ago, is world class.
And while we hope he soothes the sufferer's heart and gives a cheap, safe recipe, they try to quat braid Scotch, a task that foils their art. For while they join his converse, then though shy, they mony a lang learned word misca and misapply. That poem, The Irish Cottier's Death and Burial, and the sequence of poems that Orr wrote around the time of the rebellion and based on his experiences during the rebellion, is, I think, one of the great contributions to literature in Ireland and to the literary history of Ireland.
You said to me before, Carol, that you actually think it's a disgrace that anyone, well, in fact, everyone leaving school in Northern Ireland today will leave school without any knowledge of a poem such as this. Why do you feel as strongly about it as that?
Because this is undoubtedly, in terms of style and also in terms of the importance of the themes that it deals with, it is a great poem about the condition of the nation. And this kind of material should be on the examination syllabus. You know, people were saying, well, you know, this has the status of a separate language. Is it really justified putting it on the English literature syllabus and so on? So it seems to me that the way to go is to have a dedicated Ulster-Scots language, history and culture GCSE and ultimately A-level.
The literary canon is one thing, and an important thing. But language is ultimately hoarded, developed and given life in the individual. Few possessions are more personal than the collection of words with which we meet the world. Few things go deeper in us. Mark Thompson's Ulster-Scots roots go way back to 17th century Scotland, but his personal connection to the language was ignited in a very particular moment.
Me and my now wife, who was then my girlfriend, she decided that we were going to go to the folk museum. And on a rotating literature stand, there was a whole lot of promotional booklets. And, most of them were very glossy and full colour and, trying to sell you things. But then there was this other wee booklet that was just a bit more kind of homespun. And it was called Ullans, and it turned out to be the magazine of the Ulster-Scots Language Society. I picked this up and opened it, and I just remember the kind of the sense of the world changing before your very eyes, because the words that folk around here were using, that we had all been told were not proper words, suddenly I was seeing them in black and white, with definitions and in context, in passages of prose, and it created an appetite in me that I have not been able to suppress since, and I wouldn't want to suppress it, because there's so much to discover.
What was it in you? What was going on in you that made your response as strong as it was?
It was honestly like the opening of a door that day.
Into what? A door into what?
Into a body of literature that up until then I didn't know existed. I mean, just as a few examples here, there's 2 copies of Woodburn, very famous volume, The Ulster-Scot. Look at the thickness of that. So this is 1914.
Right.
And it's a general sort of historical overview of the entire idea. Ulster-Scots typically is lampooned by the suburban middle class in Northern Ireland. I mean, very bluntly, for middle class prods. It doesn't, sort of slot comfortably into that kind of politicised sense of identity that a lot of folk have here. And it's those middle class people who are the first to lash out and to get stuck in. 1880. This is a wee collection of short stories by a newspaper man from Newton Ards called W.G. Little.
Oh yes,
but he had this country persona called Robin Gordon.
Right.
But he published a whole collection of novels, historical fact-based novels, which were massively popular. I don't actually care what politicians and spokespeople and some academics say about this, because I know that the folk who I regard as my peers love it. And in that it has value. And, I think we have a choice here. Do we just, as is often the case in Northern Ireland, do we just demolish it and wipe it out? Or do we preserve it and treasure it and share it?
It is the way of things that native Ulster-Scots speakers are growing older and getting fewer. But in the company of the very oldest, those born into the language, we can clearly hear a world and a way of life that is not so visible nowadays.
The countryside where I was reared, and I don't think there's an Ulster-Scots speaker in it. It does annoy me. But I'm 95 and I haven't long to go. And why did I care? But I'll just talk the way I was learned to talk. And they can laugh or say whatever they like.
Do you think it might be that you're 95, that you're the oldest fluent speaker of Ulster-Scots on the go?
I suppose the oldest one, the earliest, old. You see, you're making me talk polite.
No, but you don't need to talk polite to me. I know
see,
it's the instinct, but you don't.
Because you're a stranger to me.
Aye.
I try to stay away with my Ulster-Scot, to talk sensible.
But why would you do that, Will?
I didn't know why I would do it. I didn't know why. It's because it's a strange face.
Right.
But to Wally Crummy, we're just ordinary. Ulster-Scot, pure Ulster-Scot.
If this goes, which I hope personally it doesn't, but if it goes,
what would go? What would go with it?
The whole history. What made the language then? You had to remember, where we were born, there was no electric and there was no running water. You had an old wireless, and that was how you had, and that was the only English you heard was on that wireless. So the whole spoken word was there everywhere you went. You went to the shop for your message. The shopkeeper spoke Ulster-Scots. But now, television, wireless, is on 24 hours a day, television and wireless, and rarely, if ever, unless they put something on like Rob C. Nesbitt or something like that there, you never get the tongue.
There's a terrible lot of folk likes to hear it, if you know what I mean. You can have concerts there, folk like to hear you talking in Ulster-Scot, because it has a special place.
It's been a pleasure and a privilege for me to hear people speak from the heart about the speech that is in their hearts. And while I'm here, I want to visit the grave of a man whose words have always spoken to me, the poet Louis MacNeice, buried in Carradore, just outside Grey Abbey. And here, at his grave, I want to read up some of my own thoughts with a poem called The Heart Speech of Us. The heart half knows what it knows. And sometimes from the crowd of words it risks the one or two that says the thing out loud. And in our part of the world, our words are only released when they have done their time inside, and only then on licence. But Ulster-Scots, like Thocht or Nicht or Thole or Thran or Gee, knows exactly what it's at and where it's coming free. The ways of speaking we have here go deep, like posts or oaths that root us, keep us right, and drive our hearts into our mouths. And surely that is what language is all about, letting the heart into the mouth. And whatever languages we speak here, they all let us speak for ourselves, out of ourselves, better than standard English does. So they are all important. But maybe the most important thing is to keep the conversation going, to develop the desire to keep the conversation going between us here, Thran, Ganches and all, as we are.